Consumer surplus and producer surplus look simple, but most students don't really understand them. And in exams, this one diagram can earn you easy marks. Let's break it down, starting with consumer surplus. Whenever we buy something, we all have a certain willingness to pay. That simply means the value of that product in our mind. For example, imagine you really feel like having a cup of coffee today. In your mind, that coffee feels worth maybe 150 rupees. But when you check the menu, the price is only 120. So you get the same coffee, but you pay less than what it was worth to you. That little extra happiness, that feeling of, I would have paid more, but I didn't need to, that is consumer surplus. It is the difference between what the consumer was willing to pay and what they actually paid. Now let's understand producer surplus in the same simple way. Think about the cafe who made that coffee. For them, making one cup might cost around 80 rupees, including ingredients, electricity, labor, rent, and a basic minimum profit they need to stay in business. So, 80 rupees is the minimum price they would accept. Anything below that, they would actually lose money. But the market price is 120 rupees. So they are earning more than their minimum acceptable price. That extra benefit, that margin over cost is called producer surplus. So producer surplus is price the producer receives minus the minimum price they were willing to accept, which is basically their cost. So, in simple terms, consumer surplus is the extra satisfaction the buyer gets, and producer surplus is the extra earnings the seller gets. Both are like bonus benefits that happen because of the market price. Now, let's see what they look like on a market diagram. This is one of the most important diagrams to master for exams. We will draw it slowly and neatly and see exactly where consumer surplus and producer surplus are on the graph. I have taken price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Let's draw first our demand curve. This downward sloping line is our demand curve. It shows the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for each unit. And this upward sloping curve line would be my supply curve. It shows the minimum price producers are willing to accept, basically what they want to earn for each unit. Now, where demand and supply meet, we call it equilibrium point E, and this also gives us the equilibrium price PE, PE and QE. So at PE and QE, the market is in balance. Now let's try to understand the concept behind this. This diagram is not built to scale, so I'm just going to take random numbers to explain. Now what does this demand curve shows us? This demand curve tells us that what each buyer is willing to pay for the product in the market. So for example, if I take this number, this point, it means let's say this is at 80 rupees. This buyer is willing to pay for this much quantity 80 rupees, but let's say the actual market price is only 50 rupees. So he has to pay 50. So 80 minus 50, the difference between what they are willing to pay and what they actually pay is the consumer surplus. Let's say another buyer is willing to pay 70, but he has to pay 50. So this is the consumer surplus for that buyer. So this is the rationale behind consumer surplus. So if we take this whole triangle, is basically showing us the consumer surplus, because all the buyers on this part of the demand curve are willing to pay higher price than the actual price, which is 50 rupees in our example. So this whole thing is a consumer surplus. Now let's look at the producer surplus, the benefit that sellers receive because the market price is higher than the minimum they would accept. Same concept. If you look at this supply curve, what each point on the supply curve tells us, it shows us the lowest price a producer would accept for that unit. So, for example, this seller might be willing to accept 20 rupees for his unit, but he is getting 50 rupees in the market. Similarly, he might be willing to get 30, this might be willing to get 40, like that. So, each supplier has its own minimum price in the mind, but they are getting 50 in the market. So, this is what basically the higher price than what many of them wanted. So, this extra earning for each seller is the producer surplus. So, this triangle below market price but above supply curve becomes your producer surplus. So, area below demand curve but above the equilibrium price becomes the consumer surplus. The area below the equilibrium price but above the supply curve becomes the producer surplus. And together, consumer surplus, let me take a darker color here. So together, consumer surplus and producer surplus, they form the total economic surplus in the market. Okay, so this at equilibrium, basically at this market price, your both supplier as well as the producer are gaining. Now let's put some simple numbers on this and see how we can calculate each surplus mathematically. Now let's take this example. Let's say the demand curve starts at a price of rupees 100 and the supply curve starts at 20, and their equilibrium happens at price 60 and quantity 80 units. Now, if you look at it carefully, these are just triangles. Consumer surplus is shown by a triangle and producer surplus is shown by a triangle. Because these are straight line demand and supply curves, we can use the formula of a triangle, which is half into base into height. So the same formula we will apply there. Let's see what will be our consumer surplus. Consumer surplus would be half. Now what is base? Base is this quantity we are talking about. So which is QE, equilibrium quantity, which would be 80 into height. Height of this triangle we are talking about is this, which will be 100 minus 60 is our height. So if you solve this, half into 80 into 40, which will be 1600. So our consumer surplus is 1600. Simple, yes? Now same way, let's try to calculate our producer surplus. Producer surplus, same way, half into base is again this same quantity we are talking about, which is 80 into height. Height is for producer surplus, this is the part. So 60 minus 20, which would be half into 80 into 40, which is again equal to 1600. So in this example, both consumer surplus and producer surplus, the answer is coming to be 1600. Now what would be the total economic surplus? The total economic surplus would be 1600, this 1600 plus this 1600. So total economic benefit to the society would be 3200, which is split between both consumers and producers. Both sides of the market are benefiting equally with the surplus of 1600. Now let's wrap this up with a quick summary. Let's quickly summarize what we have learned. Consumer surplus is the extra satisfaction buyers get because they pay less than their willingness to pay, And producer surplus is the extra earnings sellers receive because the market price is higher than their minimum acceptable price. And at equilibrium, consumer surplus plus producer surplus gives us the total economic surplus, the total gain to society from this market. And also, our diagram showed how both buyers and sellers gain at the same equilibrium price PE, and how these gains appear as two triangles CS and PS. So, whether you are studying for IGCSE, A level, AP, or any competitive exam, understanding this diagram clearly makes these questions very easy to score. If you found this explanation helpful, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more clear and exam focused content. And if you ever feel stuck with a topic or want personalized help, check out my tutoring services. I would love to help you learn economics the easy way. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye for now.